Hey, this is Web3 Talks. The rule of this podcast is simple. We only talk with people who have hands-on Web3 building experience. So if you are a hacker, entrepreneur, or investor, you can get inspired by their stories, lessons, and fuck-ups. My name is Mac, and I'm hosting this pod. If you want to stay in touch, go to twitter.com/Web3Talks, click the link in the pinned tweet, and join our Discord community. Let's go. Today's guest is a guy who combines three roles: a coder, NFT artist, and investment analyst. This basically means that he spends every waking hour of his life in the Web3 space. And his name is x0r, and he created Ethereum-related NFTs, MEV Army community, and under his non-anon name, Michael Blau, he works in a 16z crypto team. But, before we get to the normal questions, just get to the traditional one. Like, how have you ended up in this space? Was it because of your brother, who is a famous DJ who is heavily involved in the NFT space as well? Or was it any other way?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is an awesome show and very, very excited to be here to chat about crypto. Basically what I do all day. So absolutely love it. And yeah, so I got into crypto most certainly through my brother. I remember in the beginning of COVID when everything was shut down, it was like the beginning of DeFi summer. My brother came over and was like, Michael, why don't you come help me build some yield farming bots and we can go play around with all these other protocols and all this fun stuff. And at first, I was not that I was skeptical or anything. I was definitely interested. So I started to learn a little bit of Solidity and kind of started to play around with it. But I definitely did not get deep enough or go deep down the rabbit hole until the beginning of last year. So kind of January of 2021 is when I really started to kind of go down the crypto rabbit hole, definitely around the start of NFTs when that all happened. And it was really because one, I was a finance nerd. I studied finance in college, so I was very interested on that side of things. Also, I'm a magician on the side and a programmer. So, crypto is kind of like the ultimate culmination of everything that I love: puzzles, cryptography, code, finance. But NFTs threw me for one because I was so curious as to how it was even possible that you could have an image on the blockchain. Like, that just didn't understand what that even meant. So just out of curiosity, I kind of started to dive deep into it. And also, my brother was making NFTs at the time. And, oftentimes in some of the stuff that he was doing, he had a lot of technical questions that he just didn't know the answer to. And, as the little brother who's a programmer, I was able to help out and kind of dig a little bit deeper into some smart contracts to make sure everything was okay. That's how I got into it. Definitely through my brother, for sure.
It's good to learn that you are a magician on the bright side of the world, because most crypto magicians just make your money disappear. So it's really good that you are the good guy here. You get really into this world, and I know that you founded this MEV Army project, and I find it particularly intriguing because it's, like, at least per my definition, the space that's NFT gated. And in this space, you can learn a lot what's under the crypto hood, like learn all the technical details, how to read Etherscan, how to secure your assets, how to code. You can also share the smart contract with people so they can say whether it's legit. And I'm wondering, what has been your vision behind this project? Because that's only my working definition.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I think the best way to start is kind of rewind maybe a little bit and talk about why I sort of started making the NFTs that I did in the first place. Because every NFT I've ever created follows a pretty similar framework and theme, which is I wanted to create a visual representation of Ethereum-based technology or themes, okay? And what that sort of entails is two parts. One, I wanted the images to be in ASCII because for anyone who's in the programmer hacker world, ASCII art is pretty popular. It's very, underground coder vibes kind of deal, right? So I wanted to have that component. But actually having ASCII plays a pretty functional part of the artwork itself because it allows me to embed the underlying code of the technology that I'm trying to display within the artwork. So, the best example that I always give is one of my first pieces I ever made it was the letters NFT, and the letters NFT were composed of the ERC 721 standard from Open Zeppelin and Solidity. So that actual code was embedded in the artwork. And it sort of was this, like, this meta art where it was like the art it was an NFT of the letters NFT with the NFT code inside of it, right? So it was this sort of like really meta thing. And everything that, when I was learning about crypto in general and kind of diving down the rabbit hole, I used this artwork as sort of like a medium for me to share with everyone else what I was learning and try my best to explain it to them in an easy to understand manner. And the reason why I did this is because when I started, nobody could answer any of my questions. Like, no one really understood what was going on in the space in general, but whether that was for NFTs, whether that was for DeFi, whether that was for wallet security, like nobody really understood. It was all buzzwords. And I needed to understand. And as soon as I understood, all I wanted to do was share that with other people. So kind of that's what I've been doing over the past year. Actually, this month, it's been a year of me creating NFTs. I launched my first NFT back in April 2021. And MEV Army is really sort of like the culmination and most recent version of that, where I wanted to show people a little bit more about what MEV was, it stands for minor extractable value, and share that with the community because it's a really, really important part of the ecosystem. It's actually one of the most fascinating parts of the ecosystem that I got interested in when I first started. And basically, I guess we'll probably talk about that next, but the MEV Army is sort of a visual representation of what I consider to be like the dark forest of Ethereum and, minor extractable value in general.
Okay, and could you explain the dark forest concept? Because I'm familiar with that. There was this famous essay about dark forest like some time ago, but I'm not sure whether everyone here is on board with that idea.
Sure. So I guess I'll kind of give you the history, which is, in traditional finance, you have this thing called high frequency trading, right? And what high frequency trading is basically when, different proprietary trading firms or funds will sort of do different, for lack of a better term, like predatory tactics to make money in the stock market. And whether that was doing things like moving their servers and computers really close to the stock exchange so that the latency of making trades was shorter than everybody else, whether that was, scraping data online for news sources to try and extract information, whatever it might be, it's proprietary. So I actually can't give you a lot of hardcore examples. There's a great book, and the book is called Flash Boys. So if you are curious to learn about that, I highly recommend reading it. But anyways, this is a very real phenomenon in the traditional markets of firms competing based on latency and speed and front running and all this other sort of stuff to make a profit in the market. And of course, you would imagine that in crypto, there's probably some sort of equivalent. And that's basically what MEV is. And to kind of give you the high level definition, it stands for minor extractable value. And we can break down what those words really mean. But basically, if we think about the life cycle of a transaction, so like when you're going on MetaMask and hit confirm, what actually happens in the background? Well, Ethereum is a decentralized network of nodes, or, sometimes if you don't know what a node is, it's just another computer, right? And these computers, they might be, just validators on the network or people who are just monitoring whether transactions are legitimate or not, such as, do you actually have the ETH that you're trying to spend? Or these computers might be miners or people who are actually constructing blocks and keeping the blockchain continuously growing. When you submit a transaction, what ends up happening is that transaction gets submitted to what's known as the mempool, or in normal people terms, it's just like a pending transaction pool. So it's a pool of transactions that sort of gets gossiped and propagated to all the computers on the network. And everyone looks at this pool of pending transactions. What a miner would do is they would select transactions out of this pending pool. They would construct that in an order and then submit that as a block on the blockchain. Now, once that block actually gets mined, that's when it's officially on the blockchain. It can never go away, so on and so forth, of what we all know and love about the benefits of a blockchain. But there is a period of time where your transaction is pending before it actually gets included in the block. Now, this pending transaction pool is completely public. It has to be, because everyone on the network has to be able to look at it and actually use these pending transactions to construct the block. So what minor extractable value is saying, well, if I know all of these transactions before they're actually included in a block, there probably is some way that me as a miner can look at this pool of transactions and select certain transactions out of it and order them in certain ways to give myself extra profit. Okay, now, what does it mean by order? Well, the first thing is what you should know is when a block is mined and transactions are mined in a block, they're provided sequentially. One happens after the other. They don't all happen at the same time. It's a sequential blockchain, right? It's not asynchronous. It's completely synchronous. So the order of transactions matters. So what a miner might do, for example, to give you a concrete example, is they might say, well, I can see that there's a pending transaction of somebody who's about to go make a really large buy order on Uniswap. Now, I know, just based off of how Uniswap works, that if there's a large buy order, that's going to significantly affect the price of how Uniswap quotes that asset. So what I might do is I might say as a miner, well, because I'm the one who's in control of actually constructing this block, what happens if I actually front run this person and submit a buy order right before them? Then I place their big buy order right after mine. And then I place an immediate sell order right after their big order. And I basically sandwich them. I get in really low. Then I place their trade, which I know is going to make the price shoot up, and then immediately sell it. I'm going to get this instant profit just from having the ability to control the order of transactions in a block. So to kind of, I know that's probably a lot of big words in there, but basically it's this idea that a miner has full view of what's going on in the pending transaction pool and can use that to its advantage to extract extra value beyond what they would normally get from mining a block or transaction fees that are in a block. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Like, many people accused Citadel of doing this kind of stuff with Robinhood. So I think a lot of people are familiar with this TradFi example, but this might be something new. But like, as far as I understand, like miners are competing with themselves. Like there's no one miner. So it must be much harder to do it as there are many miners involved, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is a very, very, very competitive thing to do. Miners are constantly competing with each other. And, it's probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but, there are protocols like Flashbots, which sort of help democratize access to actually, capturing the arbitrage or any other value that there is on chain. But yeah, it is highly competitive. And that's sort of why actually it's a great comment, because it kind of leads into a little bit of like what MEV Army is, right? Is you sort of have this, the dark forest is this pending transaction pool where you have these, so-called creatures or miners lurking in the shadows, right? Waiting to take your innocent transaction and exploit it in some way. And essentially that's what MEV Army is all about, right? So you have these creatures that sort of look like robots, maybe not, some do, some don't, that are sort of visual representations of miners, right? They all have a miner hat. Mm-hmm. But the actual code that's within a MEV Army NFT is this raw code from an Ethereum node that represents transaction ordering. And the code that's in each miner is actually what a miner would use or manipulate in order to, reorder transactions to make it more profitable for themselves. So that sort of is what MEV Army is all about. It's basically trying to visualize this very cutthroat and very competitive, economic phenomenon that's going on in the transaction pool of Ethereum, and does indeed affect every user of Ethereum, whether you like it or not. So it's pretty important.
Okay. And MEV Army, like the NFT project, is targeted to like pretty advanced crypto users. I mean, like it's not for my mom or my dad. My dad even doesn't have a hot wallet, or he just keeps his money on Binance, although I'm discouraging him from that, but he's doing it anyway. So, it's mostly for people who are kind of like interested in the technical side of that, which is pretty contrary to most NFT projects, because most NFT projects are very inclusive in a way that it's like, spray and pray, like whoever buys my animal, I'm happy with that because I earn money. And I was wondering, like, why have you made this kind of choice of narrowing your target? Was it because you want to co-create this community further, and if you have builders on board, then it makes more sense? Or was there any other rationale behind it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I would say that I don't know if I'd say that it's necessarily targeted directly toward advanced users, although like the concept of MEV is a heavily advanced topic. What actually goes on in the community doesn't have much to do with MEV outside of simple education around it. It's really targeted toward people who are interested to kind of dive a little bit deeper under the hood of what's going on the blockchain. So really, you could be a complete beginner and we're very welcoming, or you could be more advanced and definitely get value out of it as well. So it's more of like an education community open to everybody. But what's funny is I think a lot of people often try and categorize like a target audience, like too advanced or not. But for me, the way that I learned, how to do all of this stuff is just kind of throwing myself into the fire, right? Just I'm not advanced in any of this stuff at all. I'm not an advanced cryptographer. I'm not a high frequency trader from the traditional world. But in order to learn this stuff, you kind of have to throw yourself into the fire and kind of accept that it's going to be a little advanced. But in my opinion, that's how I learned everything. And I think it's a great way to learn in general. So in reality, it's actually open to everybody who's interested in kind of diving deep under the hood of what's going on in Ethereum. And I think that's pretty important. There's so much misinformation around security in the space, how things actually work on the blockchain under the hood. And obviously, in the future of crypto, we cannot expect the mainstream audience to understand all this technical stuff. But I think in the current state, anyone who's in this community has a role, and that role is to understand this stuff as best as possible to help the new people and help them in a way that's safe and secure and give them accurate information, right? So anyone who's interested in diving deep into that side of things, I think the MEV Army community is probably the place for you.
My comment regarding this level of understanding in the community was because when I read the conversation, it looked like there are many people who are either developers already, building their code, or people who are learning. So it's not that common so far. But, I'm wondering, how have you captured devs' attention? Because, Web3 devs' attention is very scarce and everyone is fighting for them, all the protocols, all the dApps, all the VCs, all the projects, like everyone is fighting for their attention. And I know that you made some educational events. You made a challenge where you had to solve the puzzle to get the seed phrase of a wallet, where you had one NFT there as a reward and other stuff like that. So do you have any advice for people who would like to reach, people who are either developers or are simply interested in the technical side of things in crypto?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are two sort of ways or strategies that I've used to target this audience. The simple answer is actually the art itself. I know it'll sound crazy, but the ASCII art, if you are a developer or you are more technical, seeing the ASCII art automatically kind of creates this nostalgic of when, moment of when you started programming or even in your current programming career. And I think that, everyone has their own identity in crypto. And obviously, I think, an animal PFP might not fit a Shadowy supercoder, whereas MEV Army, that the visual sort of does a little bit better, right? So, everything can't be an animal. There needs to be some other variety in there. So I think that's one. I think the art itself does that pretty well. And I think the other side of it is, listen, as a coder myself, I love a good challenge. And there's this concept in programming called a CTF, or capture the flag, where you're basically given a puzzle and you're supposed to solve it for either a prize or just the pride of completing the puzzle. And I always get excited, as a programmer when I see those opportunities. So I would imagine other programmers do as well. And it seems to be the case, So when I do put out a puzzle, what you do find is, at least for the one that you mentioned, which was a scavenger hunt, where I basically took a seed phrase and divided it up across several NFTs. Each seed phrase word was sort of hidden behind its own puzzle. Some of it was more technical than others, but nothing that you had to learn how to program to do. You could have certainly solved this without knowing how to program at all. But basically, they were all generally programming related topics. And if you did solve it, you basically got access to a seed phrase with a wallet that had, as you mentioned, a one of one NFT. And also, I think it was 2 ETH were in the wallet as well for the first person to claim. And I think it's just, people, they want a good challenge. And I think, coders always love a good challenge. And that's why, people become programmers in the first place, is they like puzzles and they like to solve hard problems. So I think if you present that to the community, I think the right audience will come for that kind of stuff.
How do you reach these people? Do you just put it on Twitter, or you have some Discord groups that you like, or some email list or whatever? What's your way of reaching people?
I think my 3 communication channels are Discord, although that's more for people who are already in the community. But other than that, it's primarily Twitter. I think, Twitter is where all of crypto is, and that's where I post most of my stuff. I think when I started, though, the main way that I, sort of was able to build my initial community was through Nifty Gateway. So a lot of my initial NFTs were launched on Nifty Gateway. They have their own Discord. And what sort of ends up happening is when an artist does a drop on Nifty Gateway, the Nifty Gateway Discord sort of converts into artist-related Discord for the specific drop of that week. So by sort of leveraging Nifty Gateway's community, it was a really good way to sort of bootstrap my own network. And also my brother too, my brother has always been supportive of me. And I remember my first experience in Discord was actually joining his Discord server and sort of sharing it with him and, using it as my own almost as sort of like a Blau Brothers Discord. So, bootstrapping some of his network as well initially was definitely very helpful. But other than that, I think right now it's mainly through Twitter is probably the best way. And also Twitter Spaces. I want to put that out there. Like COVID has given rise to this, Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces world that I think is super relevant and important for crypto. So just being active in Twitter Spaces is pretty important.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that you are very active on Twitter Spaces. So I'm wondering, from the builder's perspective, is it like you just run it yourself, or you are, looking for interesting spaces to join and just chat with the people who run them, or, how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I have recently started my own Twitter Spaces show sort of like once a week. It's called Non-Fungible Tech, which is basically, if any listener is interested in that, you could just follow me on Twitter, x0r with a 0 instead of an O. And basically, that's where I make the announcements for that. It's definitely a technical Twitter space around crypto tech in general, just sort of diving into specific topics, whether that's NFTs, security, et cetera. So I do have my own, but also other Twitter spaces as well. I mean, shout out to On-Chain TV is another one that I absolutely love and enjoy time to time. They have a great community where people just kind of hang out and chill. Or I know I've joined the Super Layer Twitter Spaces often a few times as well, which is great. So I think it's just a combination of both. It's good to have both. It's hard to have your own Twitter space, because you have to kind of already have a community to get people to come and listen, but I like it. It's fun. So
okay, thanks a lot for that. So, I'd like to ask you about the drop, because your drop was quite a big event. Like all people on the whitelist, just minted all the NFTs that were there. And I remember that because I minted some myself as well. And, I remember that you faced some technical challenges, although, you are very interested in the whole space, and you also worked with Manifold, which is, like the top NFT team. So I'm wondering, like, what have you learned about minting through this experience, about how to manage this kind of events, how to do fuck up management, and how to overcome technical challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, stay calm. That's obviously the most important one. But I think, well, to answer the first part of your question, so the majority of the mint went to anyone who owned one of my previous pieces. And the sole reason for that is, I always am thinking about how I can support my, my community and people who've believed in me since the start. So I always want to give them access before others because they've been with me for months, if not almost a year, supporting me. So of course I want to give them, a chance to get in first because that's sort of like my core 1,000 true fans, I guess, if you wanted to say it. And in terms of the management, so that was definitely a crazy night and unexpected situation. I think the most important thing that I learned, which was actually also the cause of a lot of the problems that happened, was when you try and combine Web 2 technology with Web 3 technology, it does seem, not only with my drop, but across a few other drops in the space as well, to be a bad combination. And I think that's just because the state of the tools right now is really not advanced enough yet for that kind of integration. I mean, basically, the way that our minting process worked, to kind of give the high-level description, is that first, when you connected your wallet to the website, it would go to a centralized server that Manifold was running. And that centralized server would do a few important steps. It would, one, check to see if you were actually like a holder of the NFT and therefore valid to mint early. And what it would then, the server would basically create this unique signature that was only available to you and register that. In other words, so that you couldn't, for example, mint with one NFT and then transfer it to another wallet and then mint again. We wanted to prevent that. And then finally, the server would respond to your browser with a signature, and then you would submit that signature to the smart contract to mint. And basically what that sort of did was it ensured that if you were going to mint, you sort of had to go through our server first. So basically bots could not mint. This was like totally foolproof bot protection because you had to go through the website to mint, which of course has a lot of big benefits, right? We've seen so many drops where, bots spam it or steal it or front run it, whatever the reason is. And this was a prevention against that. But what ends up happening is the state of the blockchain moves at a different speed than a server. So what ends up happening is when those two things get out of sync, you get this weird issue where, sure, maybe you do actually own the asset on chain, but maybe The server that's sort of indexing the blockchain doesn't know it yet because it's a little bit slower. So you have this weird issue where it says you're not eligible for the whitelist when you technically are. It's just that the speed of which that moves is pretty slow relative to the server. So basically, in summary, when you are trying to do a drop that's sort of combining both Web3 and Web2 technologies, at least in this current state, you might run into these issues. And I think what I've learned is that if I were to ever maybe do something like this again, or if I were to recommend other people to do a drop where they have a whitelist, you might want to consider something like a Merkle whitelist, which is basically an on-chain whitelisting mechanism that has some certain gas efficiencies to it so that it makes it cheaper than simply checking if you're on a list on chain. It's a little bit better than that. And this way, basically, whatever your minting website is, all it needs to do is submit a transaction to a blockchain. There's no centralized server in between it at all. I think, at least in the current state of how crypto tooling and Web3 tooling exists, that might be a better model.
Okay, and do you have any like mental checklist after this experience and also the other experiences, because it's not your first drop? Do you have any mental checklist of, doing a proper NFT drop? Anything, things that you should take into account to make it successful?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I'd say that I have like a hard checklist in my head. I think, there's the typical stuff that you would imagine. Obviously, once the artwork is done, make sure that you're kind of starting any marketing or advertising around the drop at the right time. I usually do it a week before. That's like my typical timeline. But, I just think it's about, testing things and making sure they work. In my case, I did actually test it and it ended up not working. So it's also always not a foolproof strategy, but it does happen. I wouldn't say that I have like a hardcore checklist in mind, other than, make sure that you're definitely talking about it in the right timeline to your community. So they're expecting it and they know exactly when it's happening and they're awake and can schedule it on their calendar if it's necessary. But also just to make sure that any of the drop mechanics that you are using is thoroughly tested and fits into what you're trying to do. I remember there was a situation with one of my drops where the NFTs were going to be distributed supposedly in a random fashion. So basically, when someone would receive the NFT, the actual edition number would be randomized. However, what ended up happening is it wasn't randomized at all, and it was completely sequential. This was an issue that I had when I did a drop on Nifty Gateway. We were able to solve it. It wasn't a big deal. But I think like just making sure like upfront that every single component of the drop for what you're trying to accomplish is sort of handled beforehand, which I know is kind of general, but it's kind of hard to have a solid checklist because, every single drop has its own unique mechanics. Everyone's experimenting with their own strategies. Just, make sure you take the time to test it and make sure it's all good.
Okay. And I'd like to ask about your mentalism and magician experiences. I'm wondering, does it affect the way you look at crypto? Are you more watchful for scams that want to control your attention or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think to answer your question, the TLDR is 100%, being involved as a magician has certainly had a huge impact in what I do with NFTs and crypto in general. Actually, my first NFT was a magic trick. I did create a magic trick where it was an NFT that could read your mind. It was the first NFT magic trick. I highly recommend checking it out. It's called Hardin. You could find it on my website. It's x0r.com. It's on there if you scroll around a bit. But what's interesting about magic as NFTs is that you inherently create this interactive experience with the artwork. So you could imagine if this artwork was in a gallery, someone could walk up to it and experience a moment of wonder or a moment of amazement without a magician even being present, which is such an interesting concept that I love. And actually I am still working on. So even though I've only done one NFT magic trick so far, I have been working on one that should be coming out soon. That's also in this category that I'm super excited about. So in terms of the NFTs themselves, they definitely are there. But something on the other side of security, listen, magicians are probably the biggest skeptics you'll ever meet. I mean, the reason why magicians become magicians is because they saw a magician and was so skeptical that they had to know how it worked. So they went to figure out how it worked. And then, of course, they loved how it worked and fell down the rabbit hole of trying to become a magician. So most certainly, just being involved as a magician has definitely made me more skeptical. And for anything that I do in crypto, I'm a skeptical person in general. So before I ever click a button or sign a message or anything, I'm definitely very conscious of what I'm doing and making sure that it's secure. I think there was even a period of time where before I ever deposited any money into a DeFi protocol, it was a requirement for me personally that I had at least read the documentation or attempted to read the code to have some idea of what's going on. And not so much for the reason of like trying to detect a hack, although if I of course did detect a hack, I wouldn't do it. It was more just for me to be able to answer the question. You're putting money somewhere. It's definitely good to understand what's going on under the hood and be able to understand what's going on with your money, because ultimately people are depositing their money into DeFi protocols and actually have absolutely no idea what's going on under the hood. And I definitely did not want to fall into that category. So being a skeptic from that front definitely comes from Magic for sure.
Yeah, like, apart from the security issues, like even looking at the tokenomics is like pretty important step. And many people just see, oh, there's APY, like, 1,000,000% a year or something like that. And then they learn that, bam, it's gone. So yeah, it's very important. And, I'd like to ask about the community, because as MEV Army is a community that's concentrated on the technical aspects of crypto. I'd like to ask you, like, how do you take care of this community? How do you nurture it, make it more active, and so on?
Yeah, for sure. So, from the very beginning, when I first did the MEV Army drop, my goal has always been around creating the community around education, just like you mentioned. And the primary way that we do that in MEV Army is through these things called educational quests. And what educational quests are is basically this experimental idea, which I'm inspired by other crypto projects, called another one called Ethernaut, which we've actually used in the MEV Army Discord quite a bit. But basically, it's on-chain activities, and these are on-chain activities on a test network. So it doesn't cost you any money to participate. And they're technical activities that occur on the Rinkeby test network to teach you about a certain crypto concept. So whether that's, sleep minting an NFT, exploring NFT metadata, or, some things that we're doing later on with different staking mechanisms we're coming out with, or things related to metamorphic smart contracts is coming up soon as well, or even just like understanding how to deploy a smart contract to begin with, are all things that are happening on a test network. And what's interesting about this, though, is you get this really interesting feature where because Rinkeby is an EVM chain and it's a test network, your wallet on Rinkeby is the same as it is on mainnet. So I can actually do this really cool feature where I can snapshot owners of MEV Army on mainnet and then mint them an equivalent NFT of their MEV Army NFT on mainnet on their test network, and then proceed to do token gated activities on the test network that require you to hold the NFT. But because the wallets are the same, you get this really interesting feature where you can actually represent your ownership on a test network even without bridging your asset or anything. So your asset is on mainnet, it's valuable, it's secure, it's whatever it is you want it to be, but you get to leverage your ownership on another network to actually participate in these educational activities or scavenger hunts or things like that. So that's like the sort of main way that we do engagement in the community, and it's pretty fun. You often find people, helping each other out or asking me questions or other moderators questions. And then we usually finish off these quests by doing sort of like this voice chat, a debrief where I share my screen and walk through the solutions for everyone to see. And those are sort of posted and available for anyone new in the community who hasn't maybe, missed the last quest. They can very quickly catch up on the previous ones. But one of the interesting things that we're doing is another significant component of MEV Army is, I absolutely love and spend most of my time thinking about ways to experiment with NFT concepts that are different and unique. And what I mean by that is, just not simply just creating a new NFT. Like, what are different NFT mechanisms that are more focused on like art as code type stuff that we can experiment with in the community? And one of the ways that we do that with quests is through non-transferable reputation tokens that are issued on Polygon. So essentially, when you complete a quest, we record your address on the test network, which is the same on mainnet, which is also the same on Polygon. So we're leveraging this cross-chain functionality. And then we're minting you a non-transferable badge for completion on the Polygon test network, which shows your reputation for completing this. But the key experimental component here is the fact that these NFTs are non-transferable, right? So if you think about it, if you complete something and you put in the effort to learn something, that should not be something that you should be able to sell or transfer to somebody else. You completed it. This is something that you learned, and therefore it's your reputation, and reputation should not be transferred. So this is an interesting way that we're sort of experimenting with this concept that I think is going to be really important for the next phase of NFTs when, we start to see NFTs that are more stateful, that leverage on-chain data, or that maybe leverage your reputation. This is sort of like a very simplified iteration of that, where we're combining, these non-transferable tokens with learning in this sort of like, I guess you could call it learn to earn model, which is really exciting. So that's sort of like the core activity that goes on within the MEV Army community.
Regarding these NFTs, I remember this essay from Vitalik called Soul-Bound NFTs. So I think it kind of relates to that idea as far as I understand.
Exactly. Yeah. It's 100% related to soul-bound NFTs.
I'm wondering, like, when you run this community, one of the hardest things, and I'm asking that because many people who listen to this podcast are builders and they try out, their small projects and want to make them bigger for sure. I'm wondering, like, how do you make people active on Discord? Because, when you run a community and you have like 1,000 people, then it sort of runs itself. But when you have 10 people or like 50 people or 100 people, it takes a lot of time to make them, active. So I'm wondering, like, do you have any idea for that? Like, you maybe, just brought your friends that you knew that were active at the start or anything like that?
So yeah, I've been starting to, build my community over the past year. And it's taken, a lot of time and energy on my part. So when I did MEV Army, it certainly wasn't like this new community that just came out of nowhere. There were already active members, just participating in the community for a year. So, I think that's one thing is you have to build it up over time. It's not going to be instant. Also, it's giving community members like something actionable to do. At first I thought when I was doing the MEV Army specifically, like I would just do these like workshops where people would kind of come in and be able to ask me questions and whatnot. And that's really great, but it's not like, it doesn't give the community members something actionable around. It's more of just like me sharing ideas. So coming up with these quests was a really important innovation because it is basically creating something for the community members to actually do and work together on. And that's incredibly important. And along that, I think it's when you're trying to develop a community, I think there's a really, really important balance that you need to strike of how active you are in the Discord. So like for me, I find it to be incredibly important to be active in my Discord at least a little bit every day as a creator of this community. But also you need to have a balance too, because if the mods of a Discord or the creator is the only person ever responding to comments, that's not good either. You want community members to respond to each other and build a relationship with each other. There's no secret formula to how to find the balance, but I think it's important to find that balance. And over time, I think people kind of start to figure that out as you have these actionable activities that people can do.
Thanks for that. And, I have one question regarding time, because, there's this joke that people who work in Web3, they don't work 9 to 5, they work 5 to 9 because they do it after their normal job. And, you do many things. You have a community to run, you code, you create NFTs, and you also work in A16Z, which, as far as I see, is pretty active in the space. You invest all the time. So I'm wondering, like, how do you find time to do all this stuff?
No sleep, I guess, is the quick answer. No, I'm kidding. I think what I would like to say that I'm very fortunate in that everything, at least the majority of the activities that I do, whether that's NFTs, running my community, or things that I do at A16Z, they all have to do with crypto. And it's all about learning what's new in the space, keeping up to date with what's new, creating things, building things, thinking about the future of Web3 and how I could play a role in that. So the good news is that I do sort of have like this common goal across all the activities that I do. So it's not like I have a lot of context switching between, different categories. But, to be honest, I think like the way that I schedule it is I usually, during the day, and if you are in the NFT in my MEV Army Discord or x0r Discord overall, you notice this, which is that during the day, I have obligations to my, A16Z role. So I'm not as active like during the middle of the day, but at night and on weekends, I am more active to answer questions, do live streams, quests, and things like that. So, I usually say that by day, I'm a crypto engineer, analyst, and investor. And by night, I'm an NFT creator, and artist, and community manager. So that is sort of like how my calendar is spread out right now. But, to be honest with you, it's so unstructured that some days it doesn't follow that model at all. In fact, some days it's quite flipped, where I'll do community stuff during the day and other crypto related things at night. So it is something that is struggle. I'm not going to lie, but I try and figure it out and manage it as best as I can.
I think one of the great things about Web3 is that it's global. So even if it's night, in the US where you are, it might be day in India. So like it's not a problem for people because like if it was night only and you were US focused, it might be more challenging for people to follow. But because of these time zones, everyone can join basically. Okay, so we are getting till the end. So I have three like traditional questions here. So the first one is, what were the most mind-blowing Web3 projects that you have seen so far? And with mind-blowing, I mean something that made you very surprised that people have connected these dots. And, it was like, wow, it's something super interesting.
Yeah, so I think the best, most surprising thing is actually the protocol or concept in general that really caused me to fall down the crypto rabbit hole. It was one thing in particular that made me go, whoa, like this is insane. And it's the idea of a flash loan, specifically flash loans that are enabled by Aave, or Uniswap has flash swaps. And it is probably the most technical topic of crypto. It's a financial primitive that allows a developer or a trader to essentially borrow an endless amount of money, millions of dollars, use that money across different DeFi protocols to arbitrage, and try and extract profit however they can, and then return that money instantly. And basically, it all happens in one transaction, one atomic transaction on the blockchain. And it's structured in such a way where if for whatever reason the person borrowing these millions of dollars, if they try and run away from it with it, if they try to steal it, if they try not to pay it back, or even if they do try and pay it back, but they're not able to meet the interest rate or don't pay it back in full, the blockchain basically says, no, that can't happen. We're going to erase everything you tried to do. We're going to give all the money you borrowed back to the original lenders, and you're going to be left with nothing except for paying a failed transaction fee. So basically, it's like a sort of riskless way to borrow money in an atomic transaction on the blockchain, which is completely not possible in the real world. This could never happen in the real world. It could only happen on the blockchain and with Web3 and with smart contracts on Ethereum. And when I learned about this concept, I was just completely mind blown. Like the fact that you could do this is insane. And what's interesting about it is that it plays two roles in the crypto ecosystem. It plays the role of one, it might allow for capital efficiency or efficiency between different marketplaces. If somebody is going to borrow money and like do arbitrage across decentralized exchanges, flash loans sort of enable that, which is a positive for the community, the crypto world. But there's also a negative side, which is that sometimes these flash loans are unintended and they're not supposed to be built in, but yet, people are able to discover that you could take them. And that might cause, protocols to lose a lot of money, or for weird situations where I think there was even a flash loan with the ape coin that happened. There was a situation where people were able to borrow money and actually arbitrage the ape coin, or at least like claim an airdrop for ape coin in one transaction. That was pretty crazy. And there was also some sort of flash loan that had to do with punks as well, like crypto punks. So it's not just across DeFi, it's across NFTs as well. So it's a super crazy primitive. And the way it works is incredibly fascinating. Obviously, I think it's beyond the scope of this chat, but yeah, I think that was the one topic that really just blew my mind overall.
Yeah, it's crazy because you have like a few minutes until the transaction is just goes into the blockchain. So it's like, in these movies where they have like a few minutes, you have this timer somewhere on the screen, and if they don't succeed, there's just like, you load save and you can, try again or just skip it. And do people, like, I guess they don't do these transactions manually? They just use some bots? How does it work in practice?
Yeah, in order to really execute a flash loan and have creative liberty over what you do with the borrowed funds, you would have to write your own smart contracts to do that. However, there's one protocol, one project, I think it's called Fury Combo, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which does allow someone who doesn't know how to code at all to actually go and construct a flash loan with money Legos. But, I don't know how useful that is, because oftentimes executing these flash loans is something that happens very like last minute when you notice that there's an arbitrage opportunity, and it might not be feasible for someone to actually use this other platform to actually take advantage of an arbitrage that quickly. So I don't know how useful it is in that context. I haven't used it, so I'm not going to provide an opinion there. But I think that there are certain platforms that let you do it if you don't know how to code. So, it's definitely not limited to programming alone.
Okay, and so I go to the second traditional question, and it's like, what has been the funnest thing that happened to you in this space? Something that made you smile or laugh out loud?
Wow, that's actually a tough one because it's always so exciting. I think the most fun I've ever had in this space is definitely attending conferences in person and getting to hang out with, my traditional metaverse friends in person and learn from them in person has always been exciting and always been really, really fun. I think probably one of the things that made me smile the most in crypto was when I got my first airdrop. I remember, just for sake of privacy, I'm not going to mention the protocol, but to give you the example, I remember when I was first learning about crypto stuff, I was just kind of like trying everything out. I was like every protocol, I wanted to play with it. I wanted to poke at it and try and build stuff on it. Even if it was for 5 minutes or an hour, whatever it was, I wanted to try it. And I think one of those protocols actually ended up doing an airdrop to anyone who just like tried out the developer tooling. So I was able to, get a nice airdrop from just simply experimenting with the protocol. And I hadn't even known about the airdrop at the time. It was completely not like I wasn't trying to game it in any way. It was just like I was just trying to try things for fun. And I ended up getting this reward for doing it. And I think that was really cool and made me recognize the power of what this space could really do in terms of recognizing people who are, avid users of a protocol and being able to reward them and incentivize them is quite amazing. So I think that's probably one of the first things that made me smile or laugh. It was just very exciting and interesting to see it happen to me. I've heard it happen to other people, but it never happened to me. And then it finally happened to me, and I was, of course, excited about that.
Yeah, I had the same with ENS airdrop. Like, I bought this domain for like, I don't know, $200 because like $10 was the domain, but I paid like $190 for the gas fee. And I was talking with my friend and he told me like, what the fuck have you done? Like, man, like you paid so much for some domain that no one is going to use anyway. And it's on some blockchain and whatever. And I was like, yeah, because I thought if I'm going to get serious about it, I should try it out. And then it was like literally like a month or 2 months later, I get an airdrop and I'm like, wow, okay, it makes sense. Okay, so I know that you gotta go in 5 minutes. So I have the last question. And the last question is like, do you have any ideas about like whom should I invite next? Like some builder, people that can share their experiences building stuff in this Web3 space?
I think the number one person I recommend is Mouse Dev from Anonymize, the Anonymize project. He's awesome. He's super talented from a smart contract side. Prime definition of what you would consider a builder in the space. So I'd highly recommend you try and get in contact with him because he would be great to have on the show for sure.
Okay. I will try it out then. And well, like, thanks a lot. And the last question I have is the one that I shouldn't ask, but I will ask it anyway because you haven't mentioned it. What do you do in A16Z? I know that you cannot tell a lot about it, but is there anything that you can mention?
Yeah, so just at a high level, I think, my job at A16Z is as an engineering partner. And what that means is that I, split half of my time investing in crypto projects and the other half of my time doing research or experimenting and building out different protocols that we can release open source to the community. One of those I actually did recently around NFT sleep minting that you could probably find on my social accounts. And we have a few more of those coming out soon as well.
Great. Like I've seen that you lately announced this R&D team that you have 2 Goodle Award winners there. So it seems like a very solid team for developing the space. Okay, so I wish you a good day then and see you on Discord and Twitter.
Of course, thanks so much for having me. This was a blast. This was really great. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
See ya.